Hope y'all stick closer, 'cause this is gonna be more of a conversation than a presentation.
Tell us we need to move.
If you don't mind, if you're really just dead set on that back corner though, I have really good projection.
So. I've got a handful of remote folks.
Okay,
I think my options are. Well, we can, I think I've got chat open so that they can. definitely
yes, so
chat.
can you communicate with them in chat? If you can give them that URL.
Well, you can hold up and the camera on. Okay, the other thing is like what I can do is I can, since I got 4, I'm inclined to just promote them all panelists.
Yeah, that's
That
fine with me.
way they can just talk and.
Yeah, that's honestly what I would prefer.
So
For a
that's.
small enough group, I think that would work beautifully. I figure a lot of people like caught flights earlier today.
I think the top here, they get no rat.
Well, I think that's true. No, actually, no.
No,
We've always been very, sensitive to the fact that people have to leave, and so yeah, you don't need to be here. That doesn't necessarily mean we'll be able to figure out how to ship your stuff, but.
Like, oh, they got lost in the mail.
Exactly. Okay, so, I think I've got everybody, somebody declined to be promoted panelist.
That was me.
Oh, no, it's you, I'm sorry.
I just joined the Zoom because I wanted to see what they're
The
saying.
analyst is here in the room with us. All right,
Is it possible to put the chat on the side?
Yeah, I can put the chat up.
that would be fantastic, yeah. So if anybody doesn't want to speak, that's also acceptable. All right, everybody has a QR code?
Let's see. We have chat. There we go.
Stephanie! Hi!
Right, so oh, look at that. Everybody's here one way or another, so folks should be able to chime in, and that'll be good. Ooh.
Yeah, so supposedly y'all should be able to unmute and chime in as desired. I'm gonna run this like one of my classrooms, and I tend to tell my students to just interrupt me willy-nilly, because I don't believe in classroom management apparently. I'm not really sure where to stand either. So my whole idea for this session was really just that we were doing a lot of presentations about AI, but I know that some of us are already teaching AI and legal research, possibly ethics and AI. And I thought it would be neat to come in together as instructors who are already teaching it and share materials and then talk about what we're doing, what we're seeing working, what we're seeing issues with in our classes. And I created, and there is now a link in the chat, a shared drive. It's just a Google Drive, but it's open to anybody with the link. So if you have teaching materials that you want to share, that you want to workshop, that you are interested in getting feedback on, please feel free to drop them in there. I feel like the RIPS teaching kit is kind of a high bar of dedication. I did submit a capsule class this time, and it's in that drive already, and you are welcome to do whatever you want with it or nothing at all. But I feel like you expect like some judgment from your peers since it goes through a whole editing process. I don't care what you have. If you have like a half fleshed out rubric that you're like working on and you want to kind of figure out where it should go next, if you have an exercise that you finished and that you like and you've trialed it and you want to share that, anything goes in that folder. So feel free to share. I'm giving you an entire capsule class. It's something that I've been using in various iterations. I've used it as a one-off instructional session for 1Ls based on their legal writing problem. I have used it as a full 45-minute workshop. I've used it as a end cap class for my 7-week compressed course. And it really just sort of depends on what your need is. The capsule class is pretty modular, and I think it's really easy to adjust. The focus of it right now, it's a little Florida specific because I'm at Miami. I guess let me introduce myself because not everybody knows who I am. I'm Abby Deese. I'm the head of reference at the University of Miami. And I'm really active on social media, but only some of you are my mutuals, and it's probably better we keep it that way. But what I've been doing is mostly I've been worried about the ethical implications of legal research and AI, just because starting with Mata Via Bianca, where I think we saw one of the worst iterations and the most egregious. I still think that that's pair of lawyers got off very easily. It should have been way more heavily sanctioned. I think it would have nipped a lot of the problems we're seeing now in the bud if they had come down, if Judge Castle had come down harder on them. But what I've been focusing on in my instruction is sort of teasing out the way that Mata Via Bianca and these other cases that have come since happen. Like, how do they happen? Doesn't everybody know about Mata Via Bianca at this point? No. And they also think, maybe it'll work for us. So what I've been doing is really kind of teasing out the way that these hallucinations and errors and ethical issues present through the use of generative AI in legal research, which I think exposes a lot of the research weaknesses of practitioners, which we as educators of future lawyers should be really thinking about heavily. And I want to emphasize to my students that these tools are already out there. Their bosses are going to want them to use them. Some of my students are telling me their bosses are telling them to start in CoCounsel and Lexis AI Plus, which I think is the wrong move. But because in their heads, it's not billable. And so they want them to start in something that's free as far as their clients go and bill back goes. Now, I want my students to understand the limitations of these tools so that they're able to evaluate. So I started from an ethical standpoint. I showed them the ways that, lawyers have screwed up. I showed them the ways that the marketing is lying about what the products can do. And then I take them through a simulation where, and depending on whether I'm doing it as a one-off, and then I base it usually on a problem that they're doing for their legal writing, whether we've used in a couple other demos, or if I'm doing at the end of like a 7-week stretch, I'll use whatever problem we've been using in class. Because the key is I want them to be a little bit familiar with the resources and the primary law sources that already exist for that problem, so that when they start prompting the different types of AI, they can evaluate the output. Because that's my big emphasis is you have to evaluate the output regardless. I don't care about the prompting so much. I'm not there to prompt engineer with them. I want them to be able to look at what gets spits out and tell whether it's at equality and how to fix that. So the capsule course that I've got basically walks them through using a very basic prompt, like one sentence, nothing complicated. They're not doing any ingest to like, sort of prime the pump, so to speak. And they are spitting out just a brief summary of law on a specific topic. And what I ask them to do is after they've done that prompt and everybody uses the same prompt, we start in Lexis plus AI. They do the prompt, they evaluate the output for accuracy, for the weight of authority of the primary law sources it spits out, because in my opinion, that's one of the weaknesses of the domain specific is they tend to overemphasize low hierarchical case law and occasionally bring in unpublished materials. And then I have them do it in CoCounsel now that we have that. So then they compare the two. Because personally, CoCounsel is really heavy on the ChatGPT style bullet point responses. And so it's formatted very differently. I have them evaluate those two. And then the last thing we do is we use the free version of ChatGPT, the ChatGPT Mini. And then we do it a third time. Now, by that point, they've gotten pretty confident because everything that's spit out from CoCounsel and Lexis plus AI has been fairly decent. They recognize a lot of the case law. They recognize a lot of the basic legal principles that are being explained. They get the ChatGPT answer. The legal principles all sound good. And then they start looking up the cases. They go, oh, there's a lot of cases here. I was like, yeah, do you recognize any of them? No, not a single one. So I have them, since they've already, at that point already got Lexis and Westlaw open, I'm like, plug in one of the citations, see what happens. And we go through that. And so we reiterate that whole evaluation. And by the end of it, they go, oh, okay, so this is the weakness of this one. Now, yeah, because it's been trained on a lot of like lawyer blogs and general legal information from the open web, sure, it'll give you general legal principles. It'll be fairly accurate. But as far as getting you the primary law sources that you need to then draft something that can be a work product, it's useless. So I've had students in the past who actually had a subscription to a paid version of ChatGPT. Because it's connected to the live internet, it tends to be more accurate because it's getting constantly updated. So the newer models tend to be more accurate, but they do still hallucinate a huge amount. So at the end of that, and one of the great fortuitous things that happened is when I did one of these as a one-off with my 1Ls in legal writing, they had a weird problem that time that involved municipal law. So there was a relevant county ordinance. And I don't know if any of y'all know this, but only very recently, Lexis added the Municode materials to their database. It is not, however, in the training materials for Lexis Plus AI, and they're not at all in the Code Council materials. So when you ask it a question about municipal law, either of those models, it will spit out a bunch of really weird regulatory citations, sometimes to the relevant state and sometimes not. And it's basically pulling from whatever administrative materials it has that happen to reference in some vague way municipal law. But if you go and prompt ChatGPT about municipal law, it will accurately cite you to the relevant ordinances because Unicode's database is mostly open source. So that was really fun because I got to show them if it's in the training data, then the answers are going to be more accurate, even with the free tool. And it showed a real weakness with the domain-specific databases because they're not trained on that legal material. They're actually fairly limited right now. So that's kind of that course. It's freely available, take it or leave it. But I'm curious to hear from y'all, like, what are you doing? What have you tried? What has worked? What have your successes and failures been?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, no, for it.
I love that exercise. I do something like a little bit similar, but I think yours is more, I don't know, more thorough. Like I have them try to generate like their own hallucinations and like try different prompts that will force hallucinations. So they start with like, I give them the exact language that the attorneys used in their prompt in MATA, and they use that and see if it produces hallucinations or like similar. I have like a few other of those prominent cases where they've like talked about what prompt they use. And so then we talk about some of the reasons that might be causing that. Like if you ask for a really specific, something really specific, it'll, well, you know, yeah, it'll be more likely to hallucinate. So if you make it give you 10 cases, then it will just go ahead and try.
It's like a puppy dog. It wants so badly to please you and it is gonna lie to do it. That is, I don't tell my students that constantly. I'm like, if you ask it a question, it's gonna try to answer you so hard. Now, some of them occasionally, they'll ask something that's a little too legal advice specific, and they'll get a little bit of pushback, especially from ChatGPT, just because lawyers. But yeah, like that's one of the big things is just seeing how the prompting can affect that response. Anybody from chat have anything? I had some like vague topics, but I was leaving those basically for if we had a bigger group and I had to section us up. So we're just gonna play this as like one big group.
I can share something. Can you hear me or is chat better? You can't hear me.
Yes, we can. Oh, you can't.
Oh,
hear-
okay. Okay. I taught law practice technology this semester and I thought it's a technology class. They need to use technology. I will require that they use some LLM in the writing process of their final report. And one of the interesting things, there were a couple of interesting things. This probably will change, but a number of my students were really reluctant to use these products at the beginning, and some of them were still at the end. They didn't grow up with them, so they just have a lot of skepticism about it. But the other thing that I think the Blue Book just recently released in its new edition a rule about citing to AI, but I had required that they explain where they used AI in the report, and not all of them did that. I didn't tell them how to do it, so they did it in different ways, the ones who did. But that is one thing that I think we'll have to get more precise about.
Yeah, let's actually talk about 18.3 for a minute because I'm mad as hell about it. So 18.3, which is the new citing generative AI rule in the Blue Book, the newest 22nd edition. From what I have seen, and Stephanie's actually the one I think who sent me the screenshot. It wants the entire verbatim text of the prompt in the citation. I just have to wonder if the people who produce the Blue Book, the editorial staff, have ever used any GPT. I don't know. Because the example they give is like a very simple natural language googly, what I call a googly search. It's something about Taylor Swift, I don't know. But it's like a short sentence. My problem with that is, there are some prompts that are sometimes several paragraphs long, and you may even prime them with segments of like some research you've already done. And there are other models that work off ingest. And then there are other models that work best if you start the conversation and then, tweak with follow-up prompts. And there is no way with the rule of 18.3 as it currently stands to reflect any of that in a reasonable manner. We're talking about like multi-page footnotes. And I'm not looking forward to the law review cycle this year. I'm just not.
Like an appendix, like a conversation.
What are we gonna do? I don't know how that, like, it's not reasonable. So I don't know, has anybody else seen 18.3? Yes, and then the on file. Yeah, exactly. But I've never liked on file as a citation thing. I realize it's necessary, but I really think we need to figure out something perma CC related or something where we can put these things online. We're getting to a point where that's gonna have to be how it's handled. But yeah, so that's citation of AI output is gonna be a huge problem. And that's the other thing. So like Susan, because it's primarily research courses or what I teach, I don't get into the writing much. I usually make them do a research log regardless of what they're actually doing. If they're preparing some sort of written work product. Because I'm not as concerned about the quality of their writing as I am their process and doing the research that led to the work product. So when I have them do a research log, I ask them for their string search or their process, and if they used AI, they have to explain for what purpose and how they used it, what they prompted with. And I have varying types of responses to that too, because I don't give them an example, the copy paste button is right there. So we've got in chat that the whole point of citations reproducibility, and given how models change, providing prompt doesn't lead to, yeah. Well, and reproducibility is a completely different issue because the whole nature of a generative AI product is that none of it is reproducible. You will never get the same response. I have a class of 25 students and they will use the exact same prompt, copy pasted verbatim for this exercising live class, and every single one of them is gonna get a different response, and in some cases, unique citations to primary law, which goes back to my point about the fact that even the domain specifics struggle a lot with finding the best primary law to cite to you in a response. So yeah, reproducibility is another big hurdle. It's kind of, I use it sometimes as like a learning moment because by that point, they've usually used our state legal encyclopedia several times because Florida has a really robust one. And I go, okay, well, if you go look up this topic in Flogger, it's gonna be the same information every time that you go to that page. Ask the AI, and you're gonna get a different answer every time you match. Which of those makes you feel more comfortable as a practitioner? So. And Jonathan's adding that as context windows grow, a person who took federal courts will get a different response from someone who took copyright. Yes. Yeah, and the way they prompt is gonna be slightly different and emphasize different nuances of the underlying law too, so they'll get a different response. All of those are problems. What about anybody else in the room? What other kinds of exercises are we trying? I know y'all are teaching the paralegals.
Yeah, we focus a lot on the history of and the science behind AI. We don't do as much with it. My goal with my students is to teach them to understand the difference between a platform using AI and the technology of AI. Like chat, everybody you talk about AI, everybody's like, well, that's ChatGPT. And it's like, no, that's a platform, a creative writing platform using AI thing. It isn't a research engine And so you understand the reason it hallucinates and gives you cases that don't exist is it's taught not to copyright. And so it is going to change the name of plaintiffs and going to change the courts and going to change that, because that's what it's been trained to do.
It's generating text, I mean,
Yep.
it's in the name.
Yep.
Yeah, I have a question, especially for those who teach research. Take a step back from how to use the tool. What do you teach about the role that plays in the larger research process? Do you say this is a good place to start, or do you say this is a good place to find one good case to then? How do you, where do you put it? If you do put it in the larger?
So the way I've been doing it is actually, I show it at the end. Because I want to establish, because this kind of goes back to my whole theory, we were talking about this the other night. My whole theory of technology is that it takes decades for the technology to get to a point where you didn't have to understand the analog process to use the current technology. There was a great thing about GPS navigation the other day on Blue Sky, and it sort of got me thinking about this because some people were freaking out because Gen Z doesn't know how to use a compass. And I'm like, they don't need to know how to use a compass, but they do need to understand how roads are laid out. If you've got streets and avenues in a city that's laid out on a grid, they go at different, there's some of them are going east-west, some are going north-south. Like, you have to understand those basic things to navigate, whether you have GPS or not. And with Gen AI, the tech has been so overhyped that we are losing track of just how new it is and how raw it is. And I think I don't teach a lot of bibliographic research anymore, but I still explain to my students, the reason head notes are weird, work the way they do, is because it used to be a solution for finding information in a print medium. And we have jury rigged that into a digital system. And so they function differently than if they had been born for a digital system. Citator information is very similar too. And so I think it's important that they understand the analog process, even if you're not gonna drag them to the one volume of Shepherd's that's still getting updated in your library and show them how to do that in the analog. It's important to understand the history of that so that they know why the digital product, why the commercial database works the way it does. And so I do it last because of that. I want them to understand how the research process works, semi-analog, our new analog, before they get into that. Which is why it's distressing me that I'm hearing that their bosses are telling them start there. So I gotta make sure I get them to that point before they go to work.
You can't talk about it up front, since they do have access to it. You say like.
I tell them we're
use
gonna
this for now.
do it, yeah, I tell them we're gonna do it later. I tell them if they're gonna use it on an assignment, they have to tell me what they did with it, like it has to be part of their research log, they have to explain the process, regardless of what they do. I tell them too, I'm like, if you found something and it turned out not to be good, I wanna see that in your log, that is part of your research process, cause what I tell them, I give it to them as a tool, I'm like, you may touch a file for a client. And then have to switch to some other task for like a week. And you come back and you are not gonna remember anything that you did on that other file. The research log will save you because it gives you an idea of what work you've already done and where you are in the process. And so I tell them it's like a gift that I'm giving them and suddenly makes them willing to actually do it. With varying results, but that's how I try to frame it. And I tell them we're gonna address it so they don't get anxious that I'm gonna ignore it. And I'm aware that they are so freaked out about it. I had a 1L in a legal writing session that I did. This was just a one-off, but he's in my library a lot. He came to me afterwards. He was like, my dad was asking me the other day because, the vendor was talking to us and he wants him to buy the product. And he was asking me like I was supposed to explain to him how it works. And I don't know anything about it. It freaked me out. He was like, thank you. Like that was exactly what I wanted to hear. I was like, that's why we're here. To kind of close that knowledge gap.
I think it's like a chicken and the egg situation. It's, you can teach it either way. With my students, I start them with it because it's something they feel familiar with. And so it's not as scary as some of the other research specific platforms yet. And then I teach them though that this is used to survey the field. Now you know where the rabbit holes are that you want to go down and explore and see, but so that it's good, but it's a big picture good. It's like using a treatise.
Yeah,
It's great for getting to
yeah.
the big picture,
I think I kind of try to put it as a tool that you could use the way you might have used a Google search as a starting point. If you don't know anything about the area, like not even enough to know what general terms,
Right.
not even like the most precise terms of art, but just like general overview area law. A Google search will get you something, a point to start at, and it doesn't cost anything. So I try to get them to think of it as that way. Or if they get stuck at a point in their research, because it does even more advanced natural language processing basically than a regular search algorithm, it can be a backup for if you get stuck. You won't necessarily be able to evaluate the output, right, at that point, know whether it's good or not, but it may give you better terms to then go do more focused research. And the ones in Lexis and Westlaw will also direct you to secondary sources. So it may get you into the sources you don't even know exist, and so you don't know to look for them. And then I want to go to the chat really quick. One of the things, so Jonathan was talking about how the speed of progress, and this goes back to my point about analog, and also to one of the sessions the other day about how do we future-proof law students. So the speed of progress is accelerating, and the question is, you know, how do we get them trained up so that they can deal with the tech that's like 3 years down the road when they graduate? And I think that's what the session the other day was about, is really, and I think it comes down to the making sure they understand the tech now and its roots in the analog process and the history of how things work, so that they have the curiosity was one of the big things, to then use a new technology that they're not familiar with and figure it out. I want them to kick the tires. You know what I mean? Like, I want them to know where the help button is. I want them to look at what all the tabs say and what's nested under them. You know, what it's Lexis, what pops out of the side there? Oh, it's a table of contents. I know what that is because we talked about what a table of contents is. So that kind of stuff, I think, is the only way we really can future-proof anything, is just making them curious about how a thing works, even if they've never seen the thing before.
I've been trying to do it a little bit maybe more similar to that, but I haven't taught ALR yet since AI kind of took over everything. I'll be teaching in the fall for the first time. And so my thought is that AI, like all of these tools, could be used at every point in the research process. Like, I hear people mostly talk about it like as like a secondary source, as a Google source, but I think you could use it every step along the way, like as a discovery tool for finding statutes, as a discovery tool for finding cases, as a way to expand out from a few cases you have. So that's the approach I'm going to try to take when I teach it in ALR, is to kind of like do it throughout and teach it as a method of getting at each step in the legal research process. Like, we're in the beginning, we're starting with our secondary sources, right? So you can use it as kind of like, I've sort of heard some people say even like a tertiary source. It's like one step removed even. So you can use it there, but still your goal is like gather some primary sources, but also maybe find some other secondary sources. And then the next step, you're looking at statutes, and the next step, you're looking at cases. And so to kind of build it in that way.
Yeah, I want to know how that works, because I think the thing that makes me the most nervous is codified law. Because it's difficult to search even the analog way. And it's probably one of the few areas where I still rely heavily on an index, and I train my students to rely heavily on the index, because statutory and regulatory language is so dense, so particular, that it's hard to know like the generic terms that are going to show up in a keyword search. They still want to keyword search it, and it's the worst.
That's why I'm hoping the vector search may actually be a little bit better. Like, I found it kind of helpful for statutes. I could just like kind of hit my general idea, and sometimes the statute comes up, whereas it doesn't in keyword.
Yeah.
But I'm just, like I said, it's gonna be my first time. So part of what I'm also curious about is how useful are they actually? So
Yeah.
they're gonna be a little bit of guinea pigs. in
Are you
that.
gonna set them up first with understanding how like a code is organized?
Yes.
Okay, because I think that'll be key, is like, are you in the section of the insurance law that deals with this kind of
Yeah.
insurer? Or are you, this came up in my most recent final project, or are you in the section of the code that deals with this other kind of insurer? Because the language is identical. So, okay, that's cool.
That sparked another question.
Oh, yeah.
So I feel like one of the important things for students, don't have to know a ton about the underlying things, but they should know it's a different kind of search. It's how would it like, how in depth do you go to help them understand that? You just explain like, it's using some math, so it's semantic instead, or do you? I've tried many different ways to explain vectors.
Is any of it successful
I
or?
don't really know, sometimes it's in a more in-depth setting where I actually do want them to have deeper. But for research or for a 1 hour session. How deep do you have to go? Do you go at all? Do you just tell them it's semantic, it's not keyword?
I've seen Ed Walters, you know, or maybe it's Pablo, where he talked, like, he kind of explains it in terms of like sodas from a fridge, like.
No.
You want to get, you want. I explain it. So it's not helpful, sorry, but it's basically like you don't have to search for like Sprite or Coke or Pepsi, you can just say soda and it'll get like all of them.
That's a simple
And then he had a really good image too, and it shows like the vector spaces, sort of.
close together.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think honestly, I'm with that because part of the problem too is like you have to ask yourself, do they really need to understand that there's math involved? Like, and how deeply do you just need to say there's math? You don't want to know what it looks like, but there's math involved. So they understand that it's scientific, right? It's technical. And that if they don't understand technical things, then they should be cautious. So that's one of those things. Let's see.
Just to add to that, we actually have a first year students. Like a 10-minute video, just explain. Just so you understand some mechanics. I think that definitely helps, because you understand it's different from other times. Output, yeah, it isn't.
That's
I
a thing
think
that
that's
you
the-
produced.
Yeah, so one of my colleagues said.
So one of the things that Jonathan keeps bringing up in the chat is basically that, I mean, his feeling is it your feeling, Jonathan? You're asking us if we also feel that way. Basically, the tech is changing so rapidly, and eventually we're going to lose our skepticism because it's going to improve, right? Like right now, the hallucinations and the constant news about, oh, well, this lawyer screwed up again and submitted a bunch of fake cases to the court. Eventually, that's going to stop happening. Though it feels like it's accelerating, so I don't know about that. And I'm also sort of curious about whether the tech is actually going to improve as quickly as we suspect, because we are already seeing a degradation in the quality of the outputs, because now there is so much AI generated content that is now feeding back into the models. And what they've shown is that causes degradation in quality of output because it needs original content, human made content to really function. And maybe that's just the writer in me, but I think Rebecca's got.
I don't
Thoughts?
think, yeah, I do, cause I don't think that it will ever not become important because we're in an adversarial system. So like, if you submit a brief and it has like, maybe to you felt pretty comfortable doing it, but it's still, there's like a hole in your analysis, the other side's gonna catch that and they're gonna pounce on it, right? So I don't think it'll be the same as like, oh, Google and Wikipedia like are okay, like students are using them as a starting place, but lawyers aren't using them as like ground authority. We still tell them like you need, like, yeah, maybe start there, but and it's gonna help point you to the public law or whatever, but you actually need to read public law. And unless the like lawyering changes drastically, I think that'll change. Waiting for Jonathan to fight back.
I guess the question is just, are these huge systems going to have all the law in them and integrated? And so rather than thinking of the law as a silo within which we go or leave, like the library, it'll just be holistically integrated with sociology, economics, and all that other stuff. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, that'd be a twist.
Well, I feel like this kind of sideways came up in another session yesterday. Because of, projects like free law, and the fact that most of the publicly available law, the published law, is already in these systems. The limitation becomes, and this kind of goes back to something that's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, and I hope somebody's gonna write something about it. I feel like the commercial databases, because they have started ingesting so much material that is not precedential, not published. And frankly, shouldn't be cited at all under any circumstances, has changed the way that practitioners research and use the law. And I see this come up in our legal writing courses a lot, because we have a fair amount of adjuncts who are practitioners in their day jobs. And they use things that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, and then I have to explain to my students why it didn't come up in the search that I did, because I filtered it out. And they'll put that on their expected list of cases, because it has changed the way that they research and evaluate sources. And I sort of feel like if we go back to the reason the commercial platforms have all those materials is because they kind of have arrangements with the courts, and they're getting materials that aren't necessarily publicly available. And I wonder if we move away from that and the more readily available source ends up being the one that's public, trained on the publicly available law, will our behaviors in researching kind of backtrack to when we only used precedent? So I don't know. What about assessment? You guys doing any particular kinds of assessment with using these? Are you mostly still keeping it experimental and just like good faith efforts, complete, incomplete, pass, fail?
We're probably going to do it for the next semester, but we haven't.
Yeah, like how to assess it? It's risky because of that lack of reproducibility. Like how do you deal with that in an assessment environment?
I'm planning, like, after seeing all of Ariel's really cool bots, I'm thinking I can use a bunch of those for formative assessment, that they would be helpful for that.
Yeah.
Something we didn't talk about, I could give a student an FAQ, which tells them like how long they should interact with anything, like how to use it, how not to use it, right? Then they also have a reflection, like a set of reflection questions that they have to submit to then say, like, okay, what was the experience? What did you communicate with about? And they can also share their chat with you so that you can have visibility. Okay, like send me that along with your reflection. Plus, like I've given you guidelines on how to use it. So it kind of helps button the process, like, otherwise you kind of leave it and you're like, okay, what does this mean? If you just because they're like, oh, how long do I spend on it? I'm like, you could end up, because of the dopamine rush of just getting all these unneeded exam responses.
You had a whole hour-long conversation in this.
Right, and I'm like for our assignment, 45 minutes, but if it was just general interaction, 20 to 30 minutes max, right?
Yeah.
So doing reflection for sure is what I'm planning. Like that's what I've been doing as far as incorporation.
I like reflection. It's one of those things, I started using it because I used to do a lot of group projects, because it was one of the ways I could move my class off the curve. And I hate putting skills courses on the curve. Super arbitrary. But I like a reflection for something that is sort of amorphous like that. I don't like it for a lot of things, and I think it's overused in experiential courses, frankly. But it is great for an AI assignment, because the whole point, I think, is to have them think critically about what they did, what they experienced, what kind of output they got. And the reflection makes them think about, and that's why I like it for the capsule class. There is a reflection at the end. There's an assignment that's attached to it. And the end is a reflection on, okay, well, compare the outputs you got from the 3 different platforms to the research you had done previously. That's for the one that's like the full class. And, would you have used one of these as a starting point? Could you have used any of them by themselves? Like, what would now that you've seen all the available tools, what would your strategy be next time, kind of thing? So it makes them think strategically about how they can use it, or how they would feel comfortable using it. Because some of them get a little freaked out when I do the ethics portion. And I don't want them to be afraid, I just want them to be cautious. Because I think it's nothing to be afraid of, because a lot of the cases, if you look at them, lawyers who were in over their heads and should have reached out for somebody who had expertise in the area that Mata Bianca, they had no business taking that case in the first place. There was another case out of New York, and it was I think it's the Lee v. Kim. She had a client who was really difficult and was she was overworked, and she took a shortcut and got in trouble. you know, it's a lot of situations like that where if it had been best case scenario, they wouldn't have used the tool in the first place. They were reaching out for something because they were desperate. And I don't want my students to ever feel like that, but if they do, I want them to be aware that it's not gonna save you. It may actively harm you. So the reflective exercises, I think, help a lot with that.
I saw a really cool, like, I don't know if anyone follows like the, writing across the curriculum kind of community, which is like the first year writing in undergrad. And they are like all over all things Gen AI. So they're some of my favorite people to read about this stuff. And so anyway, a group of them just came out with a paper where they're arguing for like annotated chat transcripts from you as the instructor. And I thought that was really interesting because like all of us in this room are probably like fairly have done a lot of it at least. And like we have things that we know work and don't work. And so to do like to actually go through a transcript and then at the end annotate like here's why I think that was good, here's why I did that, and here's why I'm kind of surprised by the response I got, so that students can see like how it I don't know if I say expert, I don't feel like an expert myself, but like as someone like more skilled would do that.
Yeah, so a couple points on the reflections. I think that works well. I had a 1L professor who wanted to grade some generative AI stuff, but he wanted it to be low, like time spent on it. And so it was using information they were already familiar with, they'd already covered in class, it was contracts. So he just had them do a reflection. So it was like, you compare the outputs, but they didn't have to submit a ton of stuff, they just had to do a paragraph. And the second is, this was not a research class, it was AI class. One of the graded written assignments was a memo, as if a partner had asked them evaluate these different AI solutions we're looking into them. I had some other stuff like, don't worry about the price. But that and it, I have to curve the class, so that helps. You know, because it allows for some more variability in the writing and analysis. But that I thought that worked well. It makes them use the tools, but makes it easy.
Reflective time in a mix of analysis of assessment. So do the reflective, because in undergrad, the quality matters standards get pushed on us all the time. And reflective learning is one of the harder ones to get into, especially in a tech class. You know, it's like, how are you gonna reflect back on learning Word? There's just not a lot there. So I like that I can have them do a reflective piece on it, on what they learned, but then I have them give me they go through the check marks of the steps that they followed and what they did. And it includes, things like I'm checking to see in their prompt, did it tell them, did they specify the tone they were supposed to be using? So I'm watching for a checklist of things I'm assessing and not so much assessing the output, because that's all over the board and how do you do that? But I'm watching going, okay, did they go through the steps to get there that then led them to wherever they arrived at?
Usually when I do it on like a final project, I have it as one portion of the work product they have to submit, like they have to do like their own little legal memo, plus a research log. And then they have to do a client letter, because the information you'd include in a client letter would be completely different from what you include in the memo to your boss. And it's more of a tonal thing, so I like to see their prompt, so I wanna see how they communicated with it, did they shove their memo in and go, summarize this and give me a letter for the client talking about next steps, And then I want their output, because I at least wanna see like what they were working from, and then I make them give me a final edit, and if all they did was copy paste, that they lose points on that, because it never would you send to a client the thing that first got spit out by the AI, it's just not. They love bullet points, they love weird formatting. I see like all of these like dashes and little asterisks all over the place. I'm like, no. And so it's usually that.
Without an M dash.
No, well, so I love the M dash and I resent the implications of this new suspicion. The M dash has been over vilified. So Stephanie had a suggestion, I don't know, I'm gonna read this because maybe someone remembers what the product was. So there was a Google product that allowed real-time editing with a full timeline. Anybody remember anything like that?
It's the plugin that,
Oh,
that- I don't know
plugin.
if that's what she's thinking of, but like a Chrome plugin that can allow you to do that for like a Google Doc, so the instructor can go in and see like everything they've added along the way.
Goodluck's used to have that as an option where you could see every edit, who made it, and the timestamp of the edit.
Is that not in the version history anymore?
I think
It still
But
is.
it's
Yeah.
weird.
Okay,
Yeah, I use that to go and yell at people.
yeah. Well, because when I was first teaching, and this was years ago at Elon, that was the class where I had to get my students off the curve because I had it on the curve one semester and that was rough. For the group assignments, I would make them, like, one of the first things they had to do was make a shared work environment, usually a Google Drive, and get everybody on a shared document. And create like their firm name or whatever for the class they were gonna use. So at least I knew, they knew how to get everybody added to the shared drive, and they knew how to all be using a document concurrently. And I remember being able to check like the version history and see who was doing what. Look at you using Perplexity to find the other product.
I'm in like this like tech group, and the person who moderates it, every time someone asks a question, he doesn't answer them. He's like, you could have just asked Perplexity, here's what it says. That's so funny.
Oh, man, no, and Susan has brought up my nightmare. Now students can just use an AI agent to create the
Yeah.
illusion of work over time. I can't, there's a certain point where I just have to shut my brain off. Because there are situations I cannot contemplate. If they pull one over on me that way, it's too much effort at that point for me to figure it out. There's only so much I can do. It's kind of why I rely so heavily on the research log, because it's so easy to screw that up and to give the kind of information I'm not looking for. If they try to fake that. Oh yeah, there are Discord bots that do that. So I don't know, is it everybody in here familiar with Discord? It's like a kind of a chat applet. So there's a bunch of really rich bot community in there. You basically, when you have your own Discord, you can set up a bot that will do certain functions in the Discord. And you can set them up to do things like searching the content of the Discord and to respond to content. And a bunch of other things, honestly.
There's stuff like that in Reddit too.
Yeah, there's a bunch of bots in all kinds of. Those were really the original like AI that we were dealing with. Well, we're at 2:50. What time does this run till?
That's a really
250?
good question. I think it runs till.
Is it
I
3?
think we're good till 3.
Okay,
So we have a couple more minutes.
yeah. Anybody else have anything they're like curious about or want to talk about or worried about with teaching AI?
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was wondering if anyone covers like I cover professional ethics, obviously, but I had just I had a unit this past semester in my AI class, and I'm thinking about whether to do it for ALR on like other concerns like environmental, labor, copyright, we cover a little bit. But like a lot of students have real objections to using AI at all, and based on kind of some of these concerns. And so I'm just wondering if anyone's found like a good way to address that or talk about it with your students.
Terms of like the viability of the technology and what it will. I'm thinking, I've talked about mechanical Turk and how like to make all this possible, we need humans like labeling images for 2 cents per image or that kind of thing. You can remember like these are things that technology needs has to be
Exploitative.
to have we have to have the amount of energy. And this is how much energy they use. So it's legal.
How about Chad? Are any of y'all talking about like the environmental concerns, the copyright concerns and other things related to AI use with your students?
I don't, but it's interesting. It's come up a bunch at the Bar Association meetings that attorneys who are reticent about using AI often raise concerns, and it's hard to untangle those who don't want to use AI and use environmental and water as a reason not to, versus those who care about environment and water and therefore don't want to use AI. It's hard to untangle.
That's why I covered it a little bit, because I feel like there's just a lot of misinformation, or like maybe out of context information that I wanted them to, like, for everyone's probably heard like the bottle of water thing and
Somebody today on Blue Sky was asking if anybody has any actual scientific studies about the energy usage, because part of my problem is a lot of the material that I'm seeing is almost just marketing material. It's advocacy focused, both with a really strong bias. And I know that they acknowledge that the energy issues are a problem. My concern is I have not seen any concrete numbers on the breakdown of what is going into generative AI and that data processing and what is going into cloud computing and the
Streaming.
existing,
Yeah.
like the existing energy use that we're already putting into our existing cloud platforms. Because I was only hearing about this problem with the Gen AI data centers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the cloud computing and all of those data, like those data centers have been a problem for a while. We were concerned about them for privacy reasons because of the international law implications of where those data centers are housed. But I don't know where this environmental bent is coming from and what exactly the angle is on it. And so I would really love to see more concrete numbers about what the breakdown is there.
I think it's the GPUs that NVIDIA has
What?
been selling that
What
are
was that?
using a lot of it. So the AI, generative AI part uses GPUs and uses power in a different way than just regular boring old servers, because they generate a lot more heat. But one thing I do say for environmental, and I think this is it came up in a session, I think yesterday, is, generating a cat picture uses a lot more water and energy than searching the law because it's all text-based. And so if we distinguish making a movie versus making an image versus text, text is the most banal and most environmentally defensible use of AI.
Yeah, so we should really be going after the companies that want to start making Marvel movies with AI or something. I don't know.
Better. Will the movies be better?
No, have you seen the AI generated
Are
commercials?
slow right now.
That Coca-Cola commercial last year was frightening.
Yeah, but like the last Marvel movie, I don't know.
Could have been improved by.
We'll just be more of a fan.
Yeah, exactly. Personalized to you.
Maybe that's where the future is.
No, I think it's an interesting question though, and I do have, occasionally we'll get students that mention it, and this is the way that I like to address controversial issues, is mentioning them in like a soda ghost aside in the middle of a class. Because my classes are recorded and I don't have tenure. But I just like to slip comments in there and see who reacts. Because then I know there are ones I want to talk to later. But, it's something that we probably should be dealing with. But like I said, I really would like to see more.
I've got a few things, I'll put them in the folder.
Yes. I reposted it earlier because I wanted to know. Yeah.
There's an interesting, like, I'm a little skeptical about like, obviously they use a ton of electricity and water to keep them cool, because they do run hot. And as Jonathan said, it's not a computer that looks like this, or the one that sits under your desk. And if you go into if you go on the Amazon and you search for Bitcoin mining rigs, you'll see
That's
they're
exactly.
huge racks. You put like a dozen video cards in them, and you need like 10,000 watt power supplies to run them, and they might not even run at your house, right? Because
No.
they really
They were sticking them in like shipping containers
Yeah.
on like Bitcoin farms. They were just filling them with those
And-
rigs, which you can use.
But the interesting thing about all that power generation is it's hard to tell what. I was just gonna say, it's not like large swatches of the country started to go dark, but then there's Texas, but I don't know what. It's, you know, it's not like we didn't have the capacity to produce that anyway, right? It was already there. Whether or not it's good for the environment, well, most of it's not good for the environment at the end of the day anyway, and so it has to be constrained, but. I mean, the costs of that stuff, I still can't wrap my head around. Well, maybe we should think of it, how many yachts didn't they buy to create ChatGPT, right? Because the amount of money that had to go into building those things is just amazing.
What, as a resident of Newton County, Georgia.
Yeah, you guys got a lot of
Which
data
is now the data center capital
Yeah.
of Georgia. The problem is you're not separating out your data center. It's not an AI data center and then it's a data center. So on the backside of my house, the 400 and some odd acres behind my house to I-20, they're building 2.4 million square foot of data center space, 9 buildings over the next 5 years. It's like 138% increase in water and data and electrical use in Newton County alone. So the question is the county's infrastructure ready for that? Because you're not including in that infrastructure how many people are moving into said county over the next 5 to 10 years. So all these projections that have been done, I know Newton County did all the projections like 2 years ago. We're having an additional 80,000 people in this area. Well, now you're having 80,000 people plus 2 data center campuses within 5 miles of the house. So.
They have to add infrastructure, who's gonna pay for it, or ratepayer is gonna
And,
have
and
to.
how much is it that the data center needs water, so therefore my water pressure is low or non-existent? That's where I draw the line.
Well,
Low water pressure, that's
So there's another Georgia example on water, the giant Hyundai mega plant down outside of Savannah. Where their water needs are lowering the water table. Which probably wouldn't be too bad necessarily, except for the part where it's right on the edge of where the saltwater intrusion is. So as they lower the water table, the ocean comes in. But that's okay, we'll get electric Hyundais. So, you know, it's somebody made those decisions. Yeah, that's right.
Think of all the beachfront properties
All the
created.
This offsets the rising of the ocean, so we're just balancing
Balance.
Stream.
the allocation of resources.
All right,
Okay, real quick.
yeah, thank you
syllabus
so much, Susan. Yeah, what's
Sorry,
up?
syllabus statements. Okay, my school requires I have an AI use statement in my policy, but my class, I keep telling them. No, my class is about encouraging them to use AI. We use AI, it's assignments, they're told to use it on their assignments. And the school's going, nope, you gotta have a policy in your syllabus about the use of AI.
Because you used AI in the AI class.
Like, is anybody else going through that, or am I just the only?
No, I'm
Fortune
curious, because I
soul
know
that ends up
some
with
law
weird
schools are a lot more freaked
administration.
out about it than others. Some faculty are. And I've been getting questions about like how to evaluate work to tell whether AI was used for a while, and the answer is you need to have them do something that they can't easily reproduce with AI, and you don't like to write assignments like that, so good luck. Yeah, so anybody left in chat, y'all, is anybody dealing with like the syllabus policy, like AI policy problem?
I haven't gotten pushback, but my policy does say, like, this is, I don't know what yours, if yours is similar, and I did this, I was like. You are encouraged to use AI in this class for these things, and then I have like a handful of things that says, don't use it for this, like, if I ask you for a personal statement. Like, or like for a personal reflection,
Evaluation reflective.
yeah, like, I don't want ChatGPT to do the reflection,
Yeah.
that's you know, like, there's a few things in them.
And I do feel like if they're permitted to use it for certain use cases, they are less likely to use it for everything
Yeah,
in that class.
I've
It's like
noticed
a
that with my
release valve for
students, too.
pressure, like if you let them do it on this and are real specific about, no, these certain parts, I just
Yeah.
need you to do. And they're low stakes.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not like, there's no real pressure there to use another tool. Yeah, I think the only one that I have right now is just telling them how they can and cannot use it in my course. There are definitely there's a suggested AI policy at my law school, but it's mostly there so that you can use it if you're worried about it and want to have that in your syllabus, so.
My school's at this is mandatory, and every time I turn in my syllabus, they kick it back and go, no, you're missing that section
They want you to
on purpose.
bar it, like they want you
Yeah.
to say,
Yeah. And so I've started including it, and then down later I added but this class is about AI. So we
Yeah.
will use.
I will say, there have been other unrelated things, I think like a recording policy or something.
Yeah.
Where I had a caveat immediately after it in bold that was like, however, in this class.
Yeah, this is fine.
And I usually put on my boilerplate one page that I know they're not gonna look at anyway, so.
Yeah, it's just the administration that looks at it, and I. Like this,
Some things you just have to do for the administration and then move on with your
Yeah.
life, so.
okay,
No, I know, it probably soon more people will be dealing with that because there will be mandatory policies.
Yeah.
But we're still in kind of that loosey goosey, and law schools are very slow to start doing anything mandatory. Academic freedom, man, I don't know what to tell you, law faculty are wild. But I want to thank everybody, thank you all so much for sticking around online too, because I know it's a long day for just hanging out in a Zoom room. But yeah, thank all of y'all for coming by. If anybody wants to add anything, and honestly, feel free to share that Google Drive with anybody else that you are, colleagues with who's doing AI teaching. You want to share materials, steal the materials, feel free. I love to share teaching materials. I think it's great to see how other people have sort of conceptualized what an exercise should look like or how the lesson should be conveyed. So conversation, y'all.
I don't know,